At this time, we're going to have a welcome opening remarks from Paul Venable, who's chairman of the Constitution Party of Idaho. Paul, come forward. Let's welcome him.
Chairman Clymer, members of the Constitution Party National Committee, members of the Constitution Party Executive Committee, dear friends of liberty, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a light in the wilderness. It wasn't that long ago when the scales fell off of my eyes and I realized that all was not right in America. I'm grateful that after the banquet yesterday evening, we were treated to some stirring patriotic music, and I was particularly moved to hear our national anthem. The Star-Spangled Banner contains a powerful message, and I commend its words and its history for your consideration. How many of us remember back in the day when our communities had only 3 or maybe 4 television stations, when they signed off about 2 a.m. with the Star-Spangled Banner, test pattern and tone. And then, a few hours later, amid the dawn of the new day, the station signed on again with test pattern and tone, followed by our national anthem. You know you're old when things you have lived through are found in your kids' history books. Yes, there was a time in history when we didn't have 24/7 media connected to the world and hundreds of stations to choose from. I remember one summer night, it was late, and I was just old enough to discover the world that exists beyond bedtime. My father and I were up together. As the last television station was signing off and the Star-Spangled Banner was being played but had not quite ended, to my surprise, just before it was done, he abruptly stood up, walked over to the television, we didn't have remotes back then either, and turned it off. In a situation that I later realized was both a teaching moment and an apparent introduction to metaphor, he replied to my quizzical stare with these words: I don't ever want to hear America's song end. With no further explanation, I understood his meaning. That brief lesson has had a profound and enduring effect, not only on my view of America, but of who I am. So what's to become of America's song? That, my friends, may depend on a knowledge of who and what we are and the direction that we, the people, choose to pursue. Who am I? And as I ask myself, who am I? Ask yourselves, who am I? Though I consider myself to be a common citizen of little consequence, I too am American, like the many nameless millions of my fellow citizens of the Republic who pray and work and play and serve and live and die and pray and raise their families. I'm also honored to be among this company, among your company. Matilda was a former slave from Kentucky, a wiry but strong woman with a rugged constitution who lived well into her 90s. As legend would have it, she would often pick up a hot coal from the fireplace to light her corncob pipe with her bare fingers. Abraham and his son Abraham were compatriot with the likes of Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry. It was the younger Abraham to which an outgoing President Jefferson wrote, expressing his deep gratitude for financial assistance to help in wrapping up some personal business, that he might leave no obligations unattended upon his departure from office. What could possibly be the commonality between these two unacquainted Americans? It's not their time periods, it's certainly not their economic stations, nor their cultures. Yet my research points to these two individuals Matilda Davis and Abraham Venable as forebears of Paul Venable. The implications of these differences are profound, and more far-reaching than would seem on the surface. What can one conclude from discovering among one's progenitors, slaves and Quakers, slaveholders and immigrants, forebears who fought for Old Glory and others for the stars and bars? If we want to know who we are, we should also know from whence we have come. And I suspect my experience is not a singular one. Most among us are descended from long lines of sacrificing men and women who may have come to these shores on warships, merchant ships, and even slave ships, or from those who were already here when the ships arrived, many who would later follow a trail of tears. There were many who will never be named among the soldiers in the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, and Confederate and Union soldiers in the war between the states who fought with each other and against each other in their times, or the pioneers who sought religious and personal liberty, braving the tribulations of the westward frontier. What are we to gain by this knowledge? What have I done but arouse memories of injustice and differences of our past? I submit to you that we are united by the blood and sacrifice of those who have struggled throughout the history of America, who have gone on before us, that somehow God found a way to invite peoples from around the world to this land to labor and sacrifice and bleed so that we, you and I, can be here today to live, to stand up for liberty in this very day and hour. Americans can hold to that difficult past that our forebears have long left behind, or we can see in our perceived differences a test and opportunity to embrace the priceless gift from our founding fathers. The words of America's song, the Star-Spangled Banner, conjure up scenes from the War for Independence. And what was at the heart of the American Revolution? Was it about taxes, the abusive power of the military, or judicial injustices? With a certainty, taxation without representation, rendering the military independent of and superior to the civil power, and depriving the people, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, as well as other sufferings, had become intolerable for the inhabitants of the American colonies after years of fruitless petitions for relief. Those issues may have been the catalysts, but the real revolution was a realization and vision in the hearts and minds of the founding fathers, later embraced with the people, which I want to share with you and I think you'll recognize. The gift from the founders, they having understood the breadth and depth and successes and failures of governments past, conceived this revolutionary idea of a people with power. Imagine, if you will, a nation of kings. This was such a radical concept of the times that the War for Independence became the bridge for transition, an era of popular sovereignty. The concept is that the common citizen could have that freedom and liberty historically enjoyed only by those who claimed the divine right of kings. There were, of course, a few things that the founders of the Republic presupposed. One, that the people themselves might be self-governing, understanding that their natural rights and their liberty were nearly unlimited up to their neighbors' borders, and that their neighbors' rights would be similarly protected and respected. Two, that the people would be able to conceive, create, produce, and enjoy the fruits of their own labor, making their own way for their own prosperity and posterity, and not just as subjects to build the wealth of an empire. Three, that the citizens of a nation of kings might have reverence for the King of Kings. He who in the signers of the Declaration of Independence recognized as the author of our natural rights. We live in a time when we're surrounded by hazards and warning labels. We're warned about hazards under our sinks, in our foods, our water, and our air as we travel, work, and play. Put together all the hazards you could possibly imagine, and you will find none more dangerous than this one. This might surprise you, but we should put a warning label on government. I'm going to surprise you again, because that is not the hazard of which I speak. The most feared hazard of which I speak is freedom. Freedom is hazardous to a comfortable people. It requires discipline, diligence, and eternal vigilance. Freedom challenges our hearts and minds to think beyond self and time. It requires the government of self. We understand this by nature and experience. We teach our children by expanding their knowledge and capability. In the beginning, we bottle and spoon feed them until they can hold their own bottle and handle their own spoon. And as they continue to develop, they grow into levels of freedom until they are able to stand on their own, feed themselves and their families, grow independently, and make their own contribution to life. Similarly, a free people must and will be a knowledgeable and active people. Thomas Jefferson said in Notes in Virginia, page 178, quote, "Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers of the people alone. The people themselves, therefore, are its only safe depositories. And to render even them safe, their minds must be improved to a certain degree." But how free are the people when we are being spoon-fed our news, spoon-fed our entertainment, and spoon-fed our education, especially when we are not in control of the spoon? Well, it's possible that such a people can be tossed around by every wind of doctrine and multiple maelstroms of calumny, and be divided hither and thither to the point where we freely choose to cede our liberty and cease to fulfill our destiny as a people with power. When we fail to use our freedom to do right things, we ultimately lose our freedom to do anything. Freedom and liberty are hazardous to an overreaching government, and that is understood by the errant servant, even if it is not understood by us. There is a fear of which you may not be aware, and that fear is that you and I will get it, and then we'll share it. The European monarchies fear the potential effects of the vision of America on their lifestyles. The American empire fears the revival of the American Republic. It is not in the interest of those who thirst for power and wealth that we be alert, informed, undivided, and vigilant. There's good news and bad news as we contemplate the future. The bad news is that we're fighting a losing battle. Last fall, the current occupant of the White House was addressing an audience during which he attempted to quote a passage from the Declaration of Independence. Some of you may have seen this. Here is what he said. Quote, "It was faith and fidelity to the shared values we all held so dear." And then he begins to quote this passage. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Long pause. "Endowed with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." He then continues by saying, that's what makes us unique. Of course, you know and I know what he seemed unable to utter. Most of us in here can complete that quote without the use of a teleprompter. And if you'll indulge me, I'll do that for you now. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. However, I believe the unspoken words conveyed an unspoken message. A government that refuses to acknowledge its divine heritage has a message for you and for me, and that message is, Pharaoh is coming. A 26-year-old Marine, an Iraq War veteran, dies believing he is protecting his family, shot 60 times by a SWAT team in Tucson. SWAT teams and tasers are now being used seemingly routinely on the elderly, the disabled, and the Amish, Pharaoh is coming. The U.S. and Indiana Supreme Court somehow forget the Fourth Amendment protections of unreasonable search and seizure. Pharaoh is coming. A neutered Congress grants itself expensive privileges, exempts its members from its laws. I suppose I would too if I didn't read the bills. And fails a grand heroic opportunity to protect the rights of the American people, you, me, our families, and our neighbors, by simply and properly exercising their legitimate constitutional responsibilities. Pharaoh is coming. The grievances of the Founding Fathers specified in the Declaration have a familiar ring, don't they? The good news is that we are fighting a losing battle. We're being conditioned, herded, scanned, probed, entertained, and distracted. We are outgunned, outfoxed, outmaneuvered, and outsourced, and our substance and power are being sucked dry. But why is this good news? Because as we are surrounded and our feet are being wetted on the shores of the Red Sea, you know how that story ended. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no shame in being American. The shame would be that we fail the test of our differences and squander the sacrifice of our ancestors' blood to do the work that we are here today to do. In our struggles, we have the benefit of history in which we can see the ideal that what had not been reached and strive to achieve it in our day. So what will be the fate of America's song? Friends of Liberty, that fate is in our hands. Maybe these words will help us. Oh, thus be it ever. When free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto: in God is our trust. Then the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Thank you.